G'day and welcome to another one of my videos. Today we're going to have a look at comparing fractions. What do we mean by that? Well, we quite often want to put them in order or see which is larger or smaller. To do this more easily, it's best to change each fraction so that they have the same denominator, so that the bottom numbers of the fraction are the same. And once we've done that, we just compare the numerators. So here's an example. We want to circle the larger fraction. So we've got 3/4 or 2/4. Well, 3/4 looks like cutting a shape up into 4 equal pieces and shading 3 of them. And 2/4 looks like cutting a shape into 4 pieces and shading 2 of them. So if we look at the denominators, we notice that they're both the same. We've both cut them out of 4 pieces. So now we just compare the numerators, the top numbers. You notice that 3 is larger than 2, and because we want to know the larger fraction, so the 3 is larger than the 2, then the first fraction is the one we need to circle. If we wanted to circle the smaller fraction, then once we've got the denominators the same, it's the smaller number than the numerator. So here's another example. Circle the smaller fraction. So let's take a rectangle and cut it into 5 equal pieces as the denominator suggests, and shade in 3. So we've got 3/5 there. And we're going to take that same rectangle over here, and we're only going to cut it into 2 equal pieces and shade in 1 of them. So which is the larger or which is the smaller? In this case we want the smaller. Well, you'll notice that the denominators are different this time. So to make it easier to compare, we want to make both the denominators the same. So if I put a line across in this first one, just like I've got in that second rectangle there, you've noticed that I've now cut this into 10 equal pieces. And I now have 2, 4, 6 of those 10 that are coloured in. And now if I take this rectangle and cut it like I did in the first rectangle with the vertical lines, I've cut it also into 10 equal pieces, and there are 5 of them that are shaded in. Now that we've got the denominators that are the same, we now compare the numerators. So 6/10 and 5/10, we want to know which is smaller. The 5 is smaller than the 6, and now that we know that, and we want the smaller fraction, we can circle this second fraction, and we've now answered that question. What we can do though is re-look at example 2, but we're not going to use diagrams this time, because it gets to be a bit time consuming having to draw diagrams. So again, we look at the denominators and notice that they're both different. But we want to make them both the same to make them easy to compare. So one way is to multiply the denominators together to give us our new denominator for both fractions. So our 5 times 2, our denominators, 5 times 2 gives us 10. So we're going to make both fractions out of 10. And using our equivalent fractions from my last video, how do I change a 5 to a 10? Well, I've got to times it by 2. So 5 times 2 gives us 10. But I've got to do the same with the numerator to make it an equivalent fraction. So 3 times 2 gives us 6. So 3/5 is the same as 6/10. Let's do the same with the second fraction, half. Notice that to change a 2 to a 10, I've got to times it by 5. So 2 times 5 gives us 10. So let's do the same with the numerator. 1 times 5 gives us 5. So now we've got 2 fractions with the same denominators, 6/10 and 5/10. We want to know which is smaller, so look at the numerators, the 5 is smaller. So we now can say that the second fraction, half, is smaller than the 3/5. Let's have a look at another example, and this time we're comparing to work out which is larger or smaller, but in a different manner, where we've got to insert an inequality symbol, is less than or is greater than. And one way I like to remember it is that the larger bit is like a mouth, and wants to eat the larger one, and the point points towards the smaller one. So larger one, smaller one, or in this case, smaller one, larger one. So again, look at the denominators and see if they're the same, and we'll notice that the 5 and the 4 are not the same. The denominators are the ones down the bottom. So what we need to do is make them both the same. So let's multiply the denominators together to give us our new denominator for both fractions. So 5 times 4, remember our denominators, 5 times 4 is 20. So we're going to make both fractions out of 20. So we're going to use equivalent fractions again to find the numerators for both fractions, and if you've forgotten how to do that, you can look at my previous video on equivalent fractions. But we have a look at how do I change that 5 to a 20. So what I did is I multiplied by 4, so 5 times 4 is 20. And equivalent fractions says I've got to do the same with the numerators, so 4 times 4 will give us 16. So 4/5 is the same as 16 out of 20. So let's have a look at the 3/4. Again, denominators, how did I change that 4 to a 20? I multiplied it by 5, 4 5s are 20. So I have to do the same with the numerator, 3 times 5, and that's 15. So 3/4 is the same as 15/20. Now that we've got both denominators the same, we can compare the numerators. 16 is larger than 15. So we insert the is greater than symbol, remembering the open part faces the larger one and the smaller part points towards the smaller one. So we have 4/5 is greater than 3/4. Let's have a look at another example. Let's place the following fractions in ascending order. Ascending means smallest to largest. So we want the smallest fraction first and the largest fraction last. So look at the denominators and we notice that they're all different. A 7, a 5 and a 2. So one way of doing this is to make all the denominators the same and multiply all the denominators together. So 7 5s are 35. 35 times 2 is 70. Remembering there are other ways that we can do this. We can go 2 5s are 10, and then 10 7s are 70. So that's probably an easier way to do it. Do your simple ones first. 2 5s 10, 10 7s are 70. So we're making them all out of 70, and we're going to use our equivalent fractions to find the new numerators for these fractions. So how do I change this 7 to a 70? Well, I've got to multiply it by 10. 7 times 10 is 70. Or we could just go 5 times 2, these other denominators here, to remind us 5 2s are 10. So we're doing 7 times 10 is 70. We have to multiply the numerator by 10 as well, so 4 times 10, and that gives us 40 out of 70. We need to do a similar thing with the other two fractions, so let's take 2/5. How do I change a 5 to a 70? It's got to make it larger, so I've got a times. 7 times 2 is 14. Take the other denominators. So 5 times 14 should give me 70. Have to do the same with the numerator, don't forget, because they're equivalent fractions. So 2 times 14 gives us 28. So 2/5 is the same as 28 out of 70. And we'll do the same with 1/2. 2 times 35 is 70. So 1 times 35 is 35 out of 70. All three fractions now have denominators the same. So what we now need to do is compare the numerators. So the fractions in ascending order are, remember the smallest goes first, so 40 out of 70, 28 out of 70 and 35 out of 70. The 28 is the smallest. So that means 2/5 is the smallest fraction. And then our next one is 35 out of 70, which is a half. And then our last one is our 4/7. Just be careful that you actually write the fractions that you started with, not what you changed them to. So now that we've got them in ascending order, we've answered the question. So for comparing fractions, what you now need to do is practice again, and practice some more, and the more you do so, the easier it's going to become. So I hope you found this video useful and that you might want to watch some other ones to help you learn more about some fractions.